Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to our video podcast looking at Information Asset Register. Today, your hosts will be Michelle Shields, who is our Strategic Business Consultant, and Andrew Redstone, who is our Development Manager, who will be demoing our new system shortly. Over to Michelle.
Thank you, Natalie. I'll start by giving you a short introduction to GDPR. The basic principles of data privacy were set up in the 1950s at the EU Convention of Human Rights. The increased use of computers and electronic storage in the 1980s led to the adoption of the Data Protection Acts in 1984 and the Data Protection Directive in 1995 across all of the EU. The UK also unveiled its own data protection regulation, the Data Protection Act in 1998. From the mid-90s until the late noughties, there was little change in European law around sourcing, using and storing private data, and much legalisation was incompatible with growing needs and the vast increase of private data being stored. In 2012, proposals were published for all new legalisation, the GDPR. In 2016, the GDPR was officially adopted by the Council of the EU with a 2-year implementation phase until the 25th of May 2018. So this brings about a number of changes, in particular the increase in penalties associated with non-compliance, with fines of up to 40% of an organisation's turnover or up to £2 million. So, what's required in preparing for GDPR? I'll run you through a few of the changes and the things that you need to be aware of. Firstly, there needs to be awareness across all levels of your organisation of the impact of GDPR. And secondly, you need to consider the private information that you hold. What information you hold, where you get that information, who you share that information with, because it has implications for you regarding how that should be handled. There are requirements associated with individuals' rights, including how information is deleted and how individuals can access information held about them. One area that's much talked about is consent. There's a requirement for organisations to review how they seek, hold, record and manage consent, and if changes need to be made from the procedures that they currently have in place for this. Previously, consent was seen as a default opt-in type of process, but now organisations need to explicitly ask for consent to use data. There's changes in the request for access for information. Previously, organisations were given a 40-day time window, but now that's been changed to 30 days to process data. And this is a substantial change for organisations that deal with high volumes of data. In regards to rights of individuals, GDPR also covers their rights to access, their rights to rectification, their rights for erasure, and their rights around data portability. The Capita Information Asset Register assists around a number of areas. Capita's IAR creates a single centralised data repository in relation to all data that an organisation holds that could be considered personal data, whether that's on Capita databases, other software databases, or in paper formats. We believe that the 5 Ws are the key points in managing GDPR. They are: what information is held, who you're holding information about, why you're holding this information, what's the purpose of holding this information, and when you get it, how long do you intend to keep it? These are the key core elements of Capita's Data Asset Register, which look after the requirements of GDPR, which is clearly to demonstrate that you've taken due diligence. We also provide a centralised facility to manage your documentation, including policies, work instructions, and standard or approved templates that may be used for managing data and managing consent. Capita's Information Asset Register manages access rights to any data, service requests, audit activity, and the recording of data breaches, actions taken, and the monitoring of process. I'll now hand over to Andy Redstone, who will show you the software and what it can do in more depth.
Okay, thank you. So, share my screen. Yeah. Okay, so the information asset register that we're going to host in Integra will be an option, a module in Integra. So if you've got Integra installed, you can just install this. It's a very simple installation, and we've tried to make the setup and the overall logic of it very simple. It's just going to be one option, so there will be an option up here called PDR000, and from within this option, the administrator can maintain everything that they need to maintain. So I can, for example, I can see a user here, like myself, Joe Blogs, I'm logged in as. I can edit that in there, I can see the Integra username that relates to, and I can identify which of the roles that Joe Blogs is going to be in. When I do that, depending on what roles they're in, depends on the options they see down the left-hand side here. Adding a new user is as simple as creating a new user, type in Edge, as such, and deciding, oh, I'm going to make them an auditor and a GDPR document owner. Press OK, and then that person can now log in the system. Give them security access into the system, and they can see what they actually need to do. The idea is to make this as simple as possible so you can get up and start running with it straight away. So, as Michelle mentioned earlier, there's two main elements to this. There's what we call the main register, which is the fundamental tenet of the GDPR that you need to hold the who, the what, the where, the why, the when. So we have what we call the data register, which is split into data subjects and data systems that we're actually going to show. But we've also added to that, since you've gone to all the extent of putting all that information in the system, it seems sensible to allow you to record data subjects. It allows you to record documents, it allows you to record service requests, details of data breaches, and to perform audits on the systems within this system. So the data register, as I said, is made up of, its main point is data subjects. So the data subject is the person who you're holding information about, but you may come into contact with people in many different contexts. So they may be a customer, they may be an employee, they may be a patient, they may be a supplier. So for an employee, for example, what you can hold against an employee is the sort of information that you would need to uniquely identify an employee. So in this case, we're saying if somebody requests information about an employee or requests the right to be forgotten as an employee, we want to know their name, their employee number, their date of birth, etc. So that's the data subject. The other side of the coin is the systems. So these are all the applications that you are holding data in. And these can be full-on applications, like I've got the core HR system here, I've maybe got my patient record system, Salesforce is a system, and you might have personal details about people in Salesforce. But I've even got my social club spreadsheet down here, which is just a spreadsheet where I happen to have employees, and in there, because I have a unique piece of information about the employee, like their employee number or an email address, that constitutes personal information and has to be recorded. So I'm just going to go into the core HR system here. And what we get in each system is we actually record data stores. And a data store is, you're in a system, what data subjects are we holding information about? So in the core HR system, yes, we're holding details about employees, but we're also holding details about applicants, which are members of the public, and I'm also holding details about past employees. So a data store allows you to say within a system what subjects you're holding in that system. If you go into a data store, you can then see, well, what information about the employees are we storing? And at this level, this is very much the 5 Ws. This is what information are you holding, why are you holding this information, and in this system you can add reasons, and the reasons here are completely definable by you as an organisation, so you can add to the reasons and the reason categories to build up the list of reasons why you're holding the data. We're also recording who the data controllers are and who the data processors are. So it's very important that you as an organisation know who the data controllers are and who the data processors are. Finally, we've got an extra level of detail where we can hold the data locations. So again, the core HR system, I've got my employees. Yes, I've got details about my employees. But here we can actually say, well, I've got the main employee record with the name and address and all those kind of things. But I've also got details of annual leave, medical history. You know, if we're recording people's sickness in here, we technically have other data about that employee, and we can record the granularity of that data. So if somebody comes along and says, I want to be forgotten, or they want to get their data, we know where to look for the data, and you can record that fact. Adding a new data location, you may be saying, oh, we've also got payslip information in here as well, so we can just add that. And you can say that's held in a table, and it's maybe held in the payslip table or something. Okay, you can identify against each of these data stores what your retention policy is, identify whether it's encrypted, and then you can also record the actual bits of information you're recording on the payslips. Maybe you've got their account number because it records the account number the payslip was paid into. Date of birth is maybe on there as an employee number and name, etc. So you can add all those on there and set up extra information in this data store. We can also record the users who can actually physically access this. And when you do that, when you create these users and record them, I can say, oh, Dave Jones can access this environment as well. We can say, and he's got read access to it. Now, Dave Jones, we also have the ability to hold competencies against Dave Jones. So we can actually say he's had his data security training and his fraud awareness training. And you can create competency records against users to say that they're actually qualified to do what they do. Finally, against a data location within a data store, you can record risks. So you can say, and by the way, there is a risk here. You can identify the probability of the risk, the impact of the risk, and the impact detail. So again, that will probably all come out of the audits and things, but it's very, very important from a GDPR perspective that if there is a breach and the authorities come to you and say, right, you've had a breach, what are you doing about it, that you can point out that you've looked at these risks, you've identified the risks, and you've taken steps to mitigate the risks. And this is your ability to say, I've done it, I've done what I need to do. So if we go back to the core HR system, we've got those data locations. The risks is then just a group of all the risks from all the data stores. Access controls, you may want to say against the system, oh, by the way, we've got the root password and it's in an emergency box in the safety deposit box and it gets changed every month and all that kind of stuff, so you can record access control. But if the system could be an office, you know, because as you said, we could have filing cabinets with data in, etc. So you might set up a system called an office. Access control might be the password to the front door, and you might say, oh, by the way, we change it every month and we let people know by a certain mechanism, etc. Audits will come back to, and all these data breaches and documents will all come back into. So if I now go back to my data subjects and I go into the employee, I can see that an employee has their data stored in all these different systems. So this is where this becomes really, really useful, I think, because what we're actually saying is if somebody comes along and says, hey, I'm an employee and I want to be forgotten, or I'm an employee and I want my data in electronic format, the system can say, well, I know where all the employee data is here, and these are all the different systems. And when we go to do a service request in a second, you'll see how it uses that information to direct requests action to all the people involved in the employment. So that is the overall data repository, and that is, as I say, we believe the thing that allows you to conform to the GDPR regulations in terms of what you actually have to hold, because it is actually a requirement that you do have an information asset register as a fundamental requirement of the GDPR. So the next thing we've got is documentation. So we felt it would be useful. I mean, you may have these documents produced elsewhere and built elsewhere and controlled elsewhere, but we felt it would be useful to allow you to insert into the system work instructions, policy documents, and templates, so that if there is a problem and something needs to be done, rather than other people have to go all over the place looking for the stuff, it's all in one place. You've got your policy documents, etc. in here. So you can add a policy document by just selecting it. You can select your document type, template. You can add other document types, put a description in there, and then physically upload the file that you actually want to upload in here. All of these documents can have a document owner and can have a review date. So the system will prompt you to say, hang on a minute, that document's been in there 2 years, somebody needs to go and look at it and make sure it's still up to date. One of the questions that's come up before one of these suggestions was that we actually have a versioning system in here so that you can have multiple versions of the documents, and we will be looking at that. So the next thing is the service request, and the service request is one of the things that probably happen most of the time. So as a user, we're saying we can go to the service request, you can see open service requests here, but at this point you can just click new to start a new service request. So this is somebody coming to you as an organisation and say, hey, I want you to forget me, or I want you to give me my data in electronic format. So let's do that. So I'm going to say electronic transfer of data. The request type in this system drives the target date. So as we said, at the moment, 30 days. So the target date is 30 days from the date the request was entered. We can put in the requestee, and we can potentially put in their email address. And then we can choose what is the data subject. So this is the person maybe coming to say, hey, I was an employee with your organisation, and I would like you to transfer all the data you have about me as an employee. So please. Okay, and because I've picked employee, it's now prompting me for a name, employee number, date of birth, so that I can uniquely identify them. And I can choose who the request owner is, and I'm going to choose myself as being the request owner in this case. At this point, again, it may be that there's some supporting documentation that's come in with this request, and you can just upload that document and put some notes, etc. against it. But the next thing that becomes most interesting is, as I say, we're putting in a service request, and employees said they want their data. The system has said, well, we hold the data in all these different systems. That's where we've got all the information about this employee, and so we're going to send out requests to all these different people to actually physically service this request, and then we can manage that request from in this system. And at this point, because I happen to be the responsible for core HR, it's actually sending it back to me as Joe Blogs as well. So we'll submit that, press OK. So the service request is here, and as a service request owner, I can see that service request. I can see all the actions waiting in the queue, and I can see the status of those actions. But as Joe Blogs, equally, I've got actions assigned to you, and right at the top of the list, I've got this request open here still. Let's come in here. I can go into this service request. I can see the request details, see any of the reporting data, and then I can actually provide an update. So I can say, we'll process this on Thursday. And at this point, I can actually send an action to the an email to the service request owner so that they'll actually get an update. Yeah, I'm dealing with it. It's okay. I'm on the case. Okay. When I've finally done it, I can just click flag as complete, and then it will stamp it as complete and record the date it's completed. And this is the important thing. This is where we're trying to say, you know, you can use the system to track this. So if the auditors come along, the guys come along and say, well, have you been doing it? You can say, right, we got the service request on this date, we did this on this date, we did this on this date, we did this on that, we complied, we got the thing shut off in 30 days. So that is service requests. The next thing we have is data breaches. So very similar data breaches. Hopefully you won't have as many, but you can just record a new data breach. Very similar process. It will come up prompting the details of the data breach. But what we have done is we've allowed you to define, to get prepared for a data breach types. So we've got data has been lost, data has been manipulated, data has been stolen, data has been viewed. You can create these different data breach types. And if we go into data as lost, what we can do there is we can say, right, if the data breach has been lost, you know, there's potentially, you know, different documents that need to be filled in and completed for a lost data breach. And then there's potentially different actions that need to be taken. So you can set up these default actions and these default documents so that when you create a data breach, it automatically sticks them on the data breach, and then you can start carrying out those actions, filling in the documents and doing what you need to do for a data breach, rather than a data breach happening and everybody goes, oh, data breach has happened, what do we do? You've got it in the system, it's built into the system. When you create the data breach, it tells you what you need to do. Okay, finally we've got audits, and as an auditor, I can go into the system, so I'll go into the core HR system, and I can assign an audit type. Now the audit types, similar to the data breaches, as an administrator, audit types are the auditor audit types. If I go into the policy audit, for example, I can say, well, when I'm carrying out an audit, I need to answer all these questions. And the questions can be at system level or data store level. So if you carry an audit out against Integra or core HR system, you can actually say, right, all of these questions need to be asked about Integra as a whole, but these ones need to be asked about each of the data stores in the system. So if we're in, this needs to be asked about employee data, this needs to be asked about supplier data, this needs to be asked about whatever data. So if I go as the auditor into the system, like core HR here, and I say audit types here, I say assign audit type, I'm going to select policy audit. I'm going to say the auditor is me, say save. At that point, it will automatically create an audit record, and the audit type has been configured to say, oh, you should carry out the audit every 12 months. So this audit type target date at the moment is actually next year. But if I just change that to 2017, so it becomes effectively, we want to do the audit now. If we go into the audit, we can click this button to say start audit, at which point it will assign to this audit all the system questions that we need to answer and all the data store questions that need to be answered. As the auditor, we can then go into each of these questions. We can respond and say, this has been tested, and you leave it up to the auditor to say how much information they want to put there. But other questions, you might actually say, actually, I need to add a corrective action. So at this point, you can identify that there is an issue here, something needs to be done, you can record the corrective action, and again, you can monitor that, assign it to somebody, they can go and deal with the corrective action and sort that out. So that, in effect, is the bits of functionality, the main sort of 4 extra bits of functionality on top of the standard GDPR functionality that we're looking to do. As we say, we see this as running as a module in Integra, so it's a very effective way of actually you guys doing what you need to do for GDPR, and what we are looking for is some early adopters so that we can get in there and get this thing going and make sure that all of those features really do hit the mark and actually do what we want them to do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was extremely interesting. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. If you have any more questions or would like to become part of that early adopter campaign that Andrew spoke about, please email us at ibsmarketing@capita.co.uk and we'll get straight back to you. Many thanks.